I find it fairly easy to focus on what the people close to me need. But Pope Francis says that we should be neighbours to everyone. Jesus asks us not to decide who is close enough to be our neighbour, but rather that we ourselves become neighbours to all. And that's not so easy. Catholics are called to express this in their actions, in what we say, do, even the causes we support and the products that we choose. For me, the work of CAFOD, the Catholic Agency for Overseas Development, helps me understand why it's so important that we respond to this call and work in partnership with our global neighbours for a peaceful, fair world. CAFOD believes that poverty is not a matter of bad luck, it's an injustice. Together, we can tackle it. You may want to pause the video here to think about some of the things we've just learned. You may want to memorise some of the things on screen during these recap sections. They'll be really helpful for your GCSE questions on poverty and on CAFOD. So Catholics believe we are called to help our global neighbours who are living in poverty, wherever they are. And the more extreme the poverty, the more urgent the need. Relative poverty means being poor in comparison to other people who are in the same country or economy. Absolute poverty is when someone does not have access to basic human needs such as water, food, education or shelter. Absolute or extreme poverty can be caused by many factors. I'm about to chat to a CAFOD young volunteer, a school chaplain and a CAFOD member of staff. Join me as I find out more about how and why Catholics respond to poverty. Chris, as a CAFOD volunteer, can you tell us how the Bible motivates you and CAFOD to reach out to people in poverty?
Well, as a Catholic agency, CAFOD is rooted around that famous line from Scripture, "Love thy neighbour as thyself." And a story from the Bible that really illustrates this is that of the Good Samaritan, taken from Luke's Gospel. You know, we hear of somebody who acts as a neighbour to a complete stranger. And you know, we can't just read this and then do nothing. In fact, Jesus gives us a command at the end of this story. He says, "Go out and now do the same." And you know, likewise, CAFOD encourages its supporters to not just look out for the person next door to us, but also to our global neighbours as well. And a story that also illustrates that line from Scripture of loving thy neighbour as thyself is that of the parable of the sheep and goats. And we hear, you know, whatever you do to the least of these sisters and brothers, you do to me. And you know, that's powerful. Like, it's amazing, but equally, it's humbling, it's challenging, because, you know, whenever we're helping someone, we're inadvertently also helping Christ.
Thanks, Chris. Kirsty, as a school chaplain, would you like to add anything about why Catholics feel it's part of their faith to help people in poverty?
Absolutely, and we only have to look to Catholic social teaching for our answers. Catholic social teaching is a collection of wisdoms and writings, most often by popes, and it just gives us a little bit of a guide as to how to live out our faith. One of the key principles of Catholic social teaching is this idea of human dignity, the idea that every person is made in God's image and so has inbuilt dignity and is therefore due respect. Another principle of Catholic social teaching is something that we call the option for the poor, to opt or to choose to consider the poorest and most vulnerable people first. Christian love demands that the poorest and most vulnerable people are given the priority. These are two real key principles that underpin the work of CAFOD.
Thanks, Kirsty. And a heads up everyone, CAFOD has short videos that explain those principles. Chris, I've heard arguments that we should look after the UK and leave other countries to sort out their own problems. As a Catholic, how would you respond to that?
Of course, there's Scripture and Catholic social teaching, But it's not enough as Catholics to just go to church on a weekend to say an Our Father and a Hail Mary. We need to be doing more than that. We need to be acting out, living our faith. And I think this is often quite understated, to be honest. Like, it makes me think of that famous quote from Saint Therese of Avila, Christ has no hands but ours, no feet but ours.
Thanks, Chris. And thank you for joining me as I chatted to those guys. Now let's have a quick recap of what we've just learned. Now we're going to meet a CAFOD member of staff. Tom, firstly, what is a CAFOD partner?
So CAFOD carries out its work overseas through local partners. These are organisations on the ground, often church organisations, that are well placed to respond, have good community knowledge, and have local solutions to challenges.
How do you address poverty and injustice in South Sudan?
Well, communities in South Sudan face many problems, from ongoing conflict to food insecurity to climate challenges. So we work to address immediate needs, such as access to food and safe water, as well as enabling communities to build resilience and address the root causes of problems, for example, through peace building work, through sustainable interventions, such as environmentally friendly agricultural practices, and through advocacy.
And would you say that's typical of what CAFOD does in other countries as well? Anything else?
So CAFOD works with partners in the countries we're active in around the world, and sometimes that might be in response to an emergency, such as an earthquake, sometimes in development programming, for example, supporting farming communities so they can sustainably provide for themselves and their families. And sometimes that can be peace building, supporting communities to find non-violent resolution to conflict. For example, if there's peace in an area where previously there'd been a conflict, this is one of the many positive changes that can enable farmers to grow food for themselves and their families.
Tom, we've heard that CAFOD is inspired by scripture and Catholic social teaching. What else inspires CAFOD to do what they do?
The communities we work with are always an inspiration for the work that we do. In South Sudan, I've seen families and communities support each other despite huge challenges. For example, sharing land and resources with those who've had to flee their homes, often at very short notice because of conflict or flooding or other pressures. On a project visit I was on, one woman said to me, if you support someone in our culture, it's like they're your parent or family member. So tell CAFOD supporters they have family in South Sudan. Thank you. And it's great to be able to pass that message on to you today. So thank you for your support, for your prayers, and thank you for learning about our work.
Tom, I'd love to have time to ask you the story of how CAFOD began, but we're out of time. Fortunately, CAFOD has a video for that story. It was great to chat to Tom, and it's great to know that CAFOD are here for all of us in England and Wales to reach out to our global neighbours. Ultimately, CAFOD's work on sustainability expresses my own Catholic belief about the goodness of creation. Kirsty, can you tell us why it matters to Catholics to care for the earth?
And we only have to look to the book of Genesis. In the book of Genesis, it says that God created everything, and indeed it was very good. We also read that God put human beings on the earth to till it. This means to cultivate it, to keep it, which ultimately means that we have to care for it. So if creation is good and we're tasked with caring for it, then we need to use its resources really carefully, sustainably, rather than using them all up till there's nothing left. This is what Catholic social teaching calls stewardship. We're called to care for the earth as stewards, not just consumers. Jesus gives us a really lovely line in the scriptures, and if we look to Luke's Gospel, we see this really lovely line. And it says, "Are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 pennies? yet not one of them is forgotten in God's sight. So this stuff really does matter. God notices, God cares when even the smallest parts of creation are lost.
Why does CAFOD work on climate issues, Tom? Surely CAFOD's job is to help people, not the environment.
Well, as Pope Francis says in Laudato Si, we need to hear both the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. The two are inseparable, and damage to the climate is affecting the poorest people the most. And it's often those communities who do least to cause damage to the environment. We see it very starkly. Progress can be unravelled very quickly if we don't address climate challenges.
So what does CAFOD do?
We support communities to protect the environment and to adapt to livelihoods, for example, with training in environmentally friendly agricultural practices and sharing drought-resilient seeds. We support communities to advocate for changes in policy and support to protect the environment. And we advocate with the UK government, campaigning to reduce the negative impact we have on the planet by reducing the use of fossil fuels, for example.
And Chris, you became a CAFOD climate champion. So can you tell us how people in the UK can care for the earth?
Sure, I've done quite a few things with CAFOD over the past few years in addressing climate change here in the UK. Most recently, I would say, was that of the mass lobby. And I think this was a very important time for people. It was a time when they were able to finally voice their opinions. And I think this was a day where we were able to really get to speak with MPs and voice our opinions. Annually, I go either vegetarian or vegan. And for myself, it's a time to reflect upon the effects of climate change in the world.
Thanks, Chris, that's great. Maybe you could do some of those things too. I feel like I'm really clear now on how caring for the earth is another way to love our neighbour. And it's about more than just switching off lights. It's radical. I need to totally rethink how I live my life. It's been great to learn and grow our awareness. And hopefully some of this information won't just come in useful for exams and conversations in the near future, but also in our lives. It really is life-changing stuff. Each of us is invited to respond, to seek justice and peace in the world, to tackle poverty and to protect the earth, our common home. To keep up with CAFOD, you can follow them on social media at CAFOD, and you can check out their website www.cafod.org.uk. Thanks for journeying with me. I hope this video has been helpful. Best of luck.